Good afternoon. Our presentation today is on graphical user interfaces. My name is Dustin Furman.
I'm Baron Uhas.
What is the GUI? To give a simple definition, a GUI is a computer interface that allows users to interact and manipulate the computer visually as opposed to textually. We use graphical user interfaces every day. Any modern PC, smartphone, media player, etc. all operate via a graphical user interface. This means we can see what we want to do on the screen and either use a mouse or a finger to prompt the device. The GUI was invented back in the 1960s by Alan Kay and Ivan Sutherland, both American computer scientists. The first practical use of the GUI stemmed from Xerox PARC. Later, the technology stumbled at Xerox PARC to be introduced by the masses by Steve Jobs in 1984. Prior to this technology, anytime you needed to prompt a computer to do something, it was solely textual based, with no visuals. Next slide.
Alright, so before the graphical user interface, there was only a command line interface. The only way to communicate with the computer was by typing in specific commands that the computer would understand. Unfortunately, most users were unwilling to memorize hundreds of specific commands just to use a computer. The command line interface requires an expert level of computer skills in order to perform anything but the simplest of tasks. And it seems archaic to a lot of people who aren't familiar with it. The command line interface is significantly less user-friendly, but it also offers a very powerful way to communicate with the computer. A user experience in the command line interface can control a computer more efficiently because it uses less space and memory. And by eliminating a graphical user interface, a computer can become much faster because it no longer has to use its resources to render any visual displays for the users.
Yes. Just the next slide.
Okay, so in order to understand a graphical user interface, you need to understand what a programming language is. A programming language is a way through which users instruct the computer. You can create an application or a program using a programming language. Since you're communicating with the computer, you'll be able to create larger programs and give the computer better tasks. Some modern programming languages include C++, Java, Ruby, Python, PHP, and JavaScript. Although many programming languages exist, there are a few that are used much more than others, and different programming languages have different advantages and disadvantages. There are a lot of programming languages that exist under different paradigms of programming, and a lot of programming languages have elements from different theories on programming, but the one that's most relevant to the graphical user interface is object orientation. Object orientation is simply looking at separate elements of a program as separate objects. This saves the programmer time and energy. And a really good way to understand an object-oriented program is an elevator system. So in an elevator system, you're going to have, let's say, two elevators. They're both objects. Those objects have attributes such as what floor they're on and whether they're available or not. So if you are on floor 5 and you call the elevator, the computer can check what floor is, first it'll check which of the two elevators is available. If they're both available, it'll say which elevator is closest to the floor you're on by checking what floor it's on. So it's an easy way for the computer to keep track of what each object is doing. And another important element to graphical user interface is events and event handling. A computer recognizes an event as something that takes place outside of a program, but provides some sort of instruction for the program. A really good example is the keyboard. When the user strikes a key, the action can instruct the computer to display a certain letter. The keyboard is external to the program, but it still provides some input for the computer. And an event handler is a process by which the computer interprets input. Examples of common GUI events are keystrokes, mouse clicks, and movements and timers. By having an event handler, a graphical user interface is able to accept commands that make sense to humans and interpret them in a way that makes sense to a computer. Instead of confusing lines of code and memorization of commands, there are just icons that you can click, because the computer understands, oh, the user moved the mouse over and clicked on this icon. And that's why event handling is so important.
Beyond the GUI, GUI is basically a mainstay of modern technology. Like I said earlier, many devices that you use today, personal computers, smartphones, anything of the sort, uses a graphical user interface. In recent years, though, there are a couple things branching beyond the graphical user interface. One of the most prominent technologies that is voice input technology. You would see something like this in Siri through Apple, and essentially, instead of using keystrokes or mouse clicks or anything visual on a screen, you simply speak into the device to prompt it, as opposed to having any type of visual manipulative. So, if you want to call somebody, instead of pressing the icon on the phone that says call, you can simply press into the phone and speak to it. It's a little bit more efficient in some cases, but it's also less, it's more restrictive in the sense that you can't navigate things that are more complex, or if you want to do a lot more as far as texting, it might be a little bit easier for some people to type as opposed to speak. So in conclusion, the GUI was brought true to the personal computer. And really made the true meaning of personal computer, because prior to the GUI, everything was textual based. You had to type in commands to get the computer to do anything, and essentially it was deemed, computers early on were deemed for computer scientists only. The graphical user interface was a way for the lay individual to be able to work these computers. We've come a long way since the Apple Lisa, which was the first computer to ever debut the GUI for mass production. We use GUIs in pretty much every device today. The visual experience of the GUI enables anyone from children to adults to pick up a device and operate it fairly smoothly. The only knowledge necessary is the ability to read. No more complex computer language or command lines are necessary, just click and tap.
Face was also promoted by Apple when they introduced the Apple Lisa in 1983. That was the first computer ever to have a graphical user interface, and really was revolutionary. Apple's creator Steve Jobs, as mentioned earlier, went to Xerox PARC, found the technology that was necessary to make the GUI possible, and implemented it in his first major product, which was the Apple Lisa. Modern day computers now share the same technology, which began, as I said earlier, back in the 1960s, and has really helped make the GUI a lot more of a prominent feature amongst computers in the modern day, which is something that is extremely, helpful in having, like I said, the lay user work the computer. The other visual aspects of it as well, or anytime you play games or anything like that, anything flash-based, it does help, when obviously manipulating things on the screen, as opposed to using text, for example, and just, having boring effects visually. The GUI also has done a great job of implementing any type of gaming or things of that nature, because everything, again, is visual, and therefore you're able, with your eyes, to touch things, select things, move things, and that applies for video game consoles as well. Xbox, PlayStation, all of those have a graphical user interface, and either whether it's a controller or touch or touch or even like a touch screen, it all works in the same.